Let's take a look at another strengthening question. Here I want to point out this word in all caps, except. You'll see this word appear in all sorts of questions. The best way to handle questions modified by except is just to ignore this word and say to yourself, I'm going to find 4 right answer choices. Okay, so just trust me on this for now. You'll see how this plays out, and hopefully after seeing how it plays out, you'll realize why I'm telling you to do this. All right, so nothing changes except for this. Cross out the word except, write 4, circle it, meaning I'm going to find 4 right answer choices. Okay, we got to look at the historian's argument. It's really long, right? It's really long. So let's go. The Land Party achieved its only national victory in Benestria in 1935. It received most of its support that year in rural and semi-rural areas where the bulk of Benestria population lived at the time. The economic woes of the years surrounding the election hit agricultural small business interests the hardest, and the Land Party specifically targeted those groups in 1935. I conclude that the success of the Land Party that year is due to the combination of Land parties specifically addressing the concerns of those groups and the depth of the economic problems people in those groups are facing. Okay, so a lot of things to consider here. First of all, the structure of the argument. Conclusion here, premise here. The second point I want you to consider is if this argument fits into some kind of framework that we've talked about. And it's a leading question. The answer is yes, it does. The framework is phenomenon hypothesis, right? Here, you're just given a set of facts. Look, these are not in dispute, right? The Land Party indeed won the national election in 1935. And it's the only time they won the national election was in 1935, okay? Where did most of the support come from? Well, from rural, semi-rural areas. Anything else you want to tell me about rural and semi-rural areas? Yeah, that's where the vast majority of Benestria's population was at the time, right? It's pre-urbanization. It makes sense, early 20th century. What else about that year? Well, look, economic woes surrounding that year hit farmers really hard, hit small businesses really hard. And the Land Party, what about them? Well, they specifically targeted farmers and small businesses, right? I mean, they don't say how, but you can imagine being a political party, probably something like, well, elect me, I'm going to help you with your economic problems, right? Okay, so that's just the set of facts, the phenomenon. Okay, let me just, I'll just summarize them. Okay, so I've separated the phenomenon into 4 distinct facts. Again, Land Party only national victory was in 1935. The economic woes around that time was centered on agriculture and small business. The Land Party targeted those groups meaning the farmers and small business owners. And the 4th and final fact, right, that collectively make up this phenomenon is that support for the Land Party came from rural, semi-rural areas. Now, following the phenomenon hypothesis framework, which we talked about in depth in the weakening theory lessons, right? What happens when you have a phenomenon? You have a hypothesis that attempts to explain the phenomenon. Now, the thing about the hypothesis is that it's a causal story you're telling to make sense of this. With that in mind, read this again and see how the historian in the conclusion organizes this information into some sort of causal story with causes and effects, right? I conclude that the success of the Land Party that year, that is to say, this part of the phenomenon, was due to, is a consequence of, was caused by what? A combination of things, right? Land Party specifically addressing concerns of these groups, oh, that's this, and the depth of economic problems that they were facing, and this, right? And you see how this also supports the hypothesis that the Land Party received their votes from rural, semi-rural areas fits in with this hypothesis, with this causal explanation, which I'm going to map out with a big causal arrow. So now we have the argument mapped out. The author's conclusion is that the depth of the economic problems, in addition to Land Parties trying to address them, caused them to be victorious in the election, in the national election. Why should I believe that? Well, there are all these facts, right? That the fact that they won, the only time they won, there were economic problems, they did try to target them, and vote for the LP came from rural, semi-rural areas where you would expect agriculture and small businesses to be. Great. So on this spectrum, where would you put the support? I think this time we're looking at fairly good support. So if this is consistent, This over here is must be true. This here is strongly implied. I don't think it's strongly implied, but certainly I think it's better than merely consistent. I would place it somewhere over here. Yeah, I mean, this is a fairly convincing story. Causal story. Now, I'm not saying it's the only story, right? Surely there could be any number of other stories you could tell. But I think that these premises do give some support to this conclusion. In other words, this is right over here. And now our job is what? Our job is to strengthen it, right? To strengthen this argument 4 times over. Okay, meaning 4 of these answer choices are going to take this and just move it over here. Maybe one of them will actually do a really good job and move it all the way over here. Maybe another one won't do such a great job and move it over only a little bit, but it doesn't matter. Just 4 of these answer choices are going to take this support and just make it even better, right? It's like, okay, this is all true plus answer choice A, right? Plus answer choice A. Oh, now I believe this even more. Plus, right? Plus answer choice B. Oh, now I believe this even more. Okay, that's how this is going to work. It's going to happen 4 times. So let's take a look at the answers. I want to start with answer choice B, which says voters are more likely to vote for a political party that focuses on their problems. Isn't this so obvious that you almost forgot that they didn't say it in the argument? Like, what else are voters going to? Are voters going to vote for political parties that focus on other people's problems? What are we, saints all of a sudden? Obviously, voters are going to vote for a political party that focuses on our problems. But just because it's obvious doesn't mean that it's not an assumption nonetheless. The argument never said it, but the argument did assume it. So you take answer choice B, you shove it into the answer choices here, right? Sorry, or not the answer choice, you shove it into the set of phenomena you have, right? All of this stuff is still true, and answer choice B is true. Voters are more likely to vote for a political party focused on the problem. You see how the support just gets better, right? It's like, oh, I used to believe that I used to believe the story this much. Now I believe it even more, right? You targeted the farmers who are suffering problems, and guess what? People like that. People will vote for you if you do that. And look, your support, your votes did come from the rural areas, and you won. I believe the story a lot more than before you told me B was true. Okay, so B is great. B is one of our 4 correct answer choices. Let's look at C, which says the Land Party had most of its successes when there was economic distress in the agricultural sector. Okay, so the first thing I'm noting is that whatever you mean by successes, it can't be a national success because that only happened once. So you must mean some limited form of success, so regional success, right? You won the governorship of a state or whatever, province, right? Fine. So C is telling me that most of their smaller successes came when there was economic distress in the agricultural sector. Now, how in the world does that affect our argument? Does this strengthen the argument? You know, with answer choice B, it was pretty clear that it was just an assumption that the argument made. Right? And we just declare the assumption in the right direction to help the argument. For you to see why C also strengthens, you have to recall what I said about arguments that take this form, this phenomenon hypothesis form. One way they can strengthen an argument that takes this phenomenon hypothesis form is to take the hypothesis to be true and say that, you know what, if this hypothesis were true, what might you expect to also be true out in the world? If truly the economic woes that the farmers faced, in combination with the Land Party's promise of help, caused, right, in conjunction, these 2 things caused them to win the national election, wouldn't you expect similar results in similar situations? The answer is yes, right? That's how causation works. To say event A, or here it's event A is a combination event, right, caused event B, is to make a claim that in relevantly similar causal situations, you'd have similar effect situations. You can look at this answer choice as a forward-looking predictive thing, or you can look at this answer choice as a backwards-looking things that already happened type of situation. Either way, it helps, right? Because, okay, let's say we take C to be a forward-looking thing. You know, we take this hypothesis to be true, that truly these 2 events is the cause of this event. Then the prediction you would make is that in the future, if there are economic woes, they are going to experience some kind of success. Okay, fine, that's what this is, right? That confirms this prediction. Okay, now, if you look at C to be like in the past, like I'm not really sure what they mean. This whole thing is happening so far in the past, and this is also in past tense, right? I'm not sure which past tense precedes which other past tense, right? Let's say that answer choice C was talking about in the 1800s. Okay, well then this just becomes the future of this, right? Like, oh, in the 1800s, they already had a bunch of successes with elections when the agricultural economy was in distress. Well, okay, that makes me feel like, in 1935, right, the same thing happened, and I believe it more, right? I believe more that this is the correct causal explanation. Let's look at answer choice D, which says no other major party in Bonestria specifically addressed the issues of people who lived in semi-rural areas in 1935. So all of these claims plus now answer choice D. What does that do? Does that help the argument? Well, D is saying that nobody else, it's just Land Party is the only major party that addressed the issues. Well, yeah. Of course that helps. That makes this argument all the more believable, right? That makes this hypothesis all the more believable. I mean, just imagine what it would be like if it wasn't the case, if D wasn't the case. You know what? Yeah, Land Party, you targeted the farmers and small businesses, but so did the Progressive Party. They also targeted the small farmers and the small businesses. And so did the Conservative Party, for that matter. They also targeted. Now, if that were true, see, now I'm skeptical of this hypothesis. Is it really because of your targeting that, like, other people targeted, other parties targeted, they didn't win, right? The fact that you targeted now makes me feel like, man, I don't think there must be some other reason. Maybe it was just a fluke, right? Or some other reason, right? So do you see D? I'm not sure how you want to think about it. There are numerous ways to think about why D works. You can use the assumption framework, right? Like, don't know. I didn't think of this when I was reading it, but you can use the assumption framework to make sense of it. The assumption framework being that for this argument to run, one of the assumptions is that no other major party targeted the farmers and small business owners, and D affirms it, right? You can use the alternative hypothesis framework to make sense of D as well, right? Like, someone who's skeptical of this hypothesis explaining this phenomenon might be like, hold on a second. I don't think it's this at all. I think it's because the Land Party just got lucky that year. Well, that hypothesis is harder to support if D is true. Put differently, that hypothesis is easier to support if D were false, right? I'm going to say something like, you know what, the Land Party just got lucky that year. That's why they won. That's far easier to support as a hypothesis if it turned out that the Progressive Party and the Conservative Party and every other party under the sun targeted the farmers and the small businesses. Do you see what I mean? So, like, in the end, all of these different frameworks just kind of collapse in on each other. Okay, and lastly, we're down to answer choices A and E, and it's kind of tricky, right? I mean, not to say that B, C, and D weren't. They had their own challenges, but here for A and E, right, let's take a look at both of them. Starting with E, the greater the degree of economic distress someone is in, the more likely that person is to vote, right? So this is plus answer choice E. Does it help the argument? Does it move the argument in this direction? And the answer is yes, because again, it's an assumption built in, right? The phenomenon is that they're in economic distress. Land Party promised to help them. We say, oh, therefore it's these two things in conjunction that cause this thing. A built-in assumption is that the farmers and small business owners were sufficiently motivated to go out and vote, actually vote. If you're unsure about answer choice E, your objection probably takes the form of something like this. Okay, E says the more likely that person is to vote, but it doesn't say vote for whom, right? For whom is this person in economic distress going to vote for? Well, that's fine, right? Let's just kind of hold this, right? Hold this thought with its, with its possible answers, right? With its possible answers. And let's look at A now, right? In preceding elections before 1935, the Land Party made no attempt to address the interests of economically distressed urban groups. So in preceding elections, we know they lost, right? Because this, again, just inferred. This is the only national victory, so the preceding elections, presumably, they're talking about the same elections, the same type of election. They lost, and what? They didn't address, right? No attempt to address urban group interests. Okay, so how does that, plus answer choice A. Land Party lost in 1931 election, right? That's one fact from A. In the 1931 election, which they lost, they didn't address economically distressed urban groups. I don't know what to do with that. I don't even know, unlike answer choice C, I'm not even sure what question I'm supposed to ask. I know urban groups, they didn't make up a majority. They were a minority of the population, right? The fact that you didn't address their interests and you lost, does that mean addressing the interests of the majority group is the reason why you won? I don't know. Because it just seems so far removed from the logic of the argument. Whereas E, let's return to E, right? Remember, the objection for E is that, okay, fine, the greater the degree of economic distress someone is in, here we know that the farmers were in great economic distress, the more likely that farmers is to vote. And the only remaining question is for whom? For the party that's going to try to help them, or for the party that's not going to try to help them? E doesn't say. So the objection is, well, I have to assume that they're going to vote for the party that's going to help them. And if I make that assumption, then okay, fine. Then E strengthens the argument, takes the argument over here. But hey, I do need to make that assumption. Okay, fair enough. Fair enough, right? If you are of that persuasion, I just want you to keep in mind that not all assumptions are equal. Some assumptions are smaller than others. Some assumptions are more reasonable than others. E makes an assumption, granted, right, conceded. How big is that assumption? How reasonable or unreasonable is it to assume that when they say the greater the degree of economic distress someone's in, the more likely that person is going to vote for the party that's going to help with their problems? I would say that's more reasonable than not reasonable. Plus, you have to remember that we're not considering E in a vacuum. We're considering E in the context of all these other facts. The fact that farmers were in economic woe, the fact that the Land Party did try to address their problems, the fact that votes for the Land Party actually came from farm areas. These are like all these facts together makes it sound like I'm not really even assuming that much. Now let's play the same game with A. I don't even know where to start. I'm not talking about like, oh yeah, in order for A to help strengthen the argument, I just need to assume something. Right? I mean, can we even try to, in order for A to help the argument, we just need to assume blank. Can you fill in the blank? I can't, because I feel like I have to write a whole paragraph to fill in this blank, to show how A might be relevant to strengthen this argument. That's a huge difference between A and E and all the other answer choices. Okay, so finally, let me return to this point. I wanted you to scratch out the word except, write 4, circle it, because I wanted you to do the same thing that you would be doing if this were a standard non-except strengthening question. That's to say, I don't want you to do anything different. There's enough to keep track of already. I don't want you to do additional mental gymnastics to figure out what to do with except. The reason is because there's a real danger, and I'm speaking from experience of witnessing students do this. There's a real danger of treating except questions as if weakening except questions or strengthening except questions as if they were the other type. So here, there's a real danger of treating strengthening except question as a weakening question, as if you had to find an answer choice that somehow weakened the argument. And that's just false. Answer choice A does not weaken the argument, but answer choice A is the credited answer choice. Why? Because all the other 4 answers strengthen the argument. The credited answer choice only has to not strengthen the argument. That could mean weaken the argument, or that could mean, like A is displaying, just being irrelevant.